Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of the Teaching Talks podcast, the number one podcast if you want to know more about academic teaching in Groningen. My name is Simon Fokkema and I'm your host for today's podcast. Today we will be talking about academic teaching, but not only academic teaching, but also its relation to secondary teaching. So amongst others, what we will delve into is what the commonalities and differences between the two are. That could be a very interesting topic to discuss. In order to discuss this topic, I invited Falco Braaksma to join the podcast. So at this moment, Falco is an economics teacher at a secondary school that's located in a small place called Groningen. What's fun to tell about Groningen is that it's actually quite renowned for being one of the first cities, towns that contained a university within the Netherlands. So that's quite fun to tell. Falco recently officially got his Master of Education title and is now ready to teach the smartest young pupils or students in Groningen everything that he knows about economics, basically. Falco, welcome to the podcast.
Simon, thank you for having me here.
Did I include everything in your introduction, or is there something that I missed?
Well, maybe it's fun for the listener to tell that the school I'm working of is called Annemarie van Schuurman. She was one of the first female students. I think it was around 1600. She was very smart, so her parents said you have to go to the university and to learn more. So that's one of the first female students in the Netherlands. She wasn't officially a first female student because she couldn't apply to the university, but she was in the lessons behind the curtain, so that she could hear and listen to the university, to the teacher, what he was teaching.
Yeah.
But that the male students couldn't see her because they would be distracted with her presence.
Yeah, wow. Well, that definitely got different these days, and I think that's also interesting because we have the Aletta Jacobszaal here, so it's basically the hall where students have to make their exams. But that's a very nice addition. So basically what we want to do is, we want to discuss academic teaching and secondary teaching or high school teaching, and we want to look if there are important commonalities and differences between the two. So that's what we're going to delve into. So for all the listeners, so I know Falco from outside the podcast, and we also talk, of course, about our jobs. So that's basically the information that we will base this podcast on. Let's just delve right into the content. So I have one central question for you, and that's what are the most important commonalities and differences between academic and secondary teaching? And then I would first like to start off with the commonalities. So do you maybe have ideas of commonalities between the two? So what is the same between our jobs?
Well, when we talk in private, we always have in common that we have a lot of administration work to do. So at this moment, I should be grading some tests of my pupils, but I'm here with you for the podcast, of course. So that's one of the things we have both in common, that we have a lot of administration work to do. And of course, we both are teaching, but I think that there are also some difference in teaching the university pupils, but that's a topic for later in this conversation. So the administration work is quite a lot at the secondary school, in my opinion. We have a lot of grading to do, we have a lot of lessons to prepare for the next day or for the next period, for example. And of course, we have to do maintain contact with the parents, so that's always something to do. I'm curious, do you always also have a lot of preparations to do for your lessons, or is that already done by a former
eco-ordinator, for example. So I think in general, I think the administrative work that I have is preparing my lessons, of course, grading, so what you also mentioned, and what I also sometimes have to do is, well, for example, we make student groups and then we eventually put them in our system called Brightspace. So those are the main tasks, and of course just answering student mails, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so if I talk about, okay, grading on the one hand, preparing lessons on the other hand, is that something that you recognize that you also have to do a lot? Or so, for example, do you also have to put groups into the system, or is that not really something that you do?
No, putting groups into the system, that's not part of my job. We have called a rooster maker. It's someone who puts the schedules together and puts the pupils already in my classes. So that's not a part of my job.
Yeah.
So that's not really something what I have to do.
Yeah, and then so you also asked me about, okay, do you get your lessons? Are they already pre-made by some coordinator, or can you develop them yourself? And I think that's somewhat 50-50. So I think 50% of the times I get something, and I'm basically expected to carry that out and do that as well as possible. So I am allowed to change certain things, of course, if I think that would be better. But I get something pre-drawn, and I think the other half of my time I have to create something from scratch, and I think that also works nicely. So sometimes you get ideas from the pre-drawn ideas of other coordinators, and then you can apply them again within your own lessons, basically. How is that for you? Do you have the freedom to talk about what you want in your lessons?
I sometimes have the freedom, but we really have some boundaries. We have to be aware of its curriculum and some requirements that are sometimes a deadline for us.
Okay, so what I'm also very curious at is basically what you always do in general with economics. So what I know, what you do, and I think that's very interesting, is that you watch the news for yourself, and you are kind of scanning the news for interesting topics to also discuss with your pupils. So I think that's very interesting, and I think that's something that we could do more, for example. But can I ask you, how do you do that precisely? So how do you incorporate the things from the news into your own lessons?
Well, first of all, I always watch the news with some news programs. One of my favorites is called Nieuwsuur. They are talking about some, I think, 3 or 4 topics that they are talking about in the show. And those topics I sometimes use in my class to give an introduction about a new topic. And when they are talking about Shell leaving the Netherlands, I'm using that example for an introduction about the competitive position of the Netherlands. So, for example, and of course, I'm reading some economic books to be updated about the new economics lessons or the new economics topics. It's also something when a teacher comes in my classroom to watch how I teach. It's something what they are looking at, is my lesson up to date? So that's something I really have to do. Is that also something you have to do?
Yeah, so what you are saying about someone who is coming and really checking your teaching, that's not something that's really happening here. So I think if you want to, you can ask for help, and you can ask for it yourself. So then I'm sure that colleagues would be willing to join me in my tutorial sessions or in my lectures, whatever. But it's not really that there's a system with an inspection. I guess it's in Dutch it's called like that, in which people are really checking your teaching or something like that. But that is prominent in secondary teaching, right?
Yes, absolutely. Someone is coming in my classroom with a checklist. So they are going to look at how do I start the lesson, what's the introduction, what's my relation with the pupils, am I positive to them, or am I more nagging about them? So that's something really they are doing, and they are looking for, is he qualified to do the job? Yeah. And if you get a good grade at the end of the lesson, you can get a job for multiple years, for example.
Okay. So if you are offered a contract, is really dependent also on the inspection and what the inspection says.
Yes, absolutely. When it's not a good inspection, when your lesson wasn't good enough, they will come a second time, and when it's then not good enough again, then you won't get a new contract. So that's something really you have to be aware of about relevant topics, and you have to really to be aware of when are they coming. So what's my lesson at the day? Is it a nice lesson? So that's sometimes really different than you usually do.
Yeah.
So yes, it's not always a good thing, I think, but sometimes you'll get really good tips.
Yeah, tips and hints from them. Yeah, I can imagine. And then so I'm curious about this because I've never encountered this. So okay, so first of all, do you prepare your lessons differently when you know that someone of the inspections will be coming? So what I could imagine, for example, is that I would, well, maybe just stress different things that, for example, are easier to explain within these lessons. Do you also do that, or do we just keep it the same or stick to the plan?
Well, to be honest, I do that. I make my lessons more simple so that I'm more secure of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's really a big thing when the real education inspection of the Netherlands, the general inspection comes at the school. A lot of people are then really stressed. It's really important to have a good grade as a school.
Yeah.
When a colleague in my lessons is coming, then it's the stress level is lower because it's not really a big thing. Of course, I want our contract at the end of the time, but when the education inspection of the Netherlands is coming, the general inspections, then it's really a big thing, and a lot of colleagues are really stressed, and the school is stressed, and also the pupils know that the inspection is in the lessons because all the teachers are doing mostly something different or something really simple, so that they don't make a mistake.
Yeah.
Do you also have some inspection at the university? The general inspection? Are they also looking at the school or the lessons?
Not really, I think. So I've never encountered it. So I'm working here for 1.5 years now, and I've never really encountered that someone was joining really to kind of assess me. So that's somewhat different at least. But yeah, and I think it also have good thing and bad thing. So in the university, what happens is that you are basically evaluated by the students. So when I'm evaluated on how I'm doing my job, I have on the one part I have the student evaluation, so they are saying what they think about me. And on the other hand, I have how colleagues work together with me. So they will say something about, okay, is Simon proactive, or can he do things better? How was the collaboration? So I think basically those are the two things that we kind of use to make sure that someone is doing the job well. And I also think that's okay. So usually what happens is when you really do not teach well, then the students will say something about it, and so that will eventually come to light.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I forgot to also mention that colleagues will evaluate my behavior in the school, and also the students or pupils I have will also give evaluations.
Okay.
And of course someone in the back at my class will give an evaluation, so we have that again in common.
Oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, there are different ways of really assessing how you're doing your job, and I think that's also true for us, but we do not really have an inspection. But let's go on, because we're already talking a little bit about the differences between our jobs, and what I always found interesting to look at is the age difference, right? Because I'm teaching students that are, well, quite old already, quite mature, and you're teaching younger children almost. And what I could imagine, but please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have to focus more on the behavior and the conduct of the pupils or the students than I have to do. So I personally, I do not focus a lot on it. So sometimes I say, okay, put your mobile phone away, but that's really it. How is that for you?
Well, there's a great difference about behavior between academic level and the secondary level I'm teaching. So the target group is different. I really have to be strict about the mobile phones. They have to be away in a mobile phone bag, so that they are not using it when I'm teaching some new topics.
Yeah.
Also the behavior when they're talking through my teaching. That's something I really have to be aware of, that they have to be quiet, that they have to be more on their behavior when someone is pushing another in the classroom, or when they are eating in my classroom. It's all those kind of things is something that a secondary teacher has to deal a lot of in their class.
Yeah.
I'm curious, are students also eating in your lessons, or are they also pushing each other, or throwing some things? And it's sometimes really
So I think they sometimes eat, but personally I do not mind that much. So when I'm explaining something and they want to eat something, I'm okay with that, as long as they do not distract the others, right? Pushing and throwing things, that's not something that happens within the university classroom, I guess. So everyone is just sitting there. So what I mainly struggle with is that, well, students are then not active enough, for example, and that I really need to engage them with discussions and that kind of stuff. But no, I'm not really focused on the behavior. And I'm also, well, I find it interesting what you say about the mobile bag, because what I, for example, sometimes do is that I say, okay, use your telephone in order to fill in a poll, for example. So I use it. But yeah, so when the mobile phones are in the telephone bag, then that's not really an option anymore. Do you find that regretful that they cannot use it anymore, or do you think that's a good thing?
I think it's a good thing, but sometimes I'm using the mobile phone to do a Kahoot, for example, but not really often anymore, because they will use it for other things like TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. I don't really think they are on Facebook anymore, but they will use it for a different thing than the purpose of their phone. So it's really a thing to be aware of, that they are using it for other things than you want to. So a poll or something like that, it's not really a thing that I would use in my lessons. Maybe it's a shame, but sometimes you're learning to deal with it. So
yeah, and I also partially agree with you. So sometimes what I see happening also in lectures of others, for example, is that they use polls with mobile phones, while you could have also asked students to raise their hands, for example. And then, raising their hands also has my preference, basically. But yeah, sometimes it could be a nice addition, I think. What I'm also interested in is how you collaborate with your colleagues. So what I see here is that when I have a course together with someone else, then we kind of intensively collaborate. So we communicate a lot and that kind of stuff. Mostly via the mail. For some colleagues I also use WhatsApp and that kind of stuff. But what we do not have is real planned meetings. So for example, every week, that's not something that we do. How is that for you, the collaboration with your colleagues?
Well, I have to deal a lot with my colleagues, of course. We have a lot of collaboration between each other. Every week we have a standard meeting on Friday. So every Friday we are with a group of colleagues talking about some topics. For example, we're talking about the usage of mobile phones, or when pupils are coming with a jacket in the classroom, what do you do with it? Well, a new rule is that they are allowed to wear a jacket anymore in the classroom.
Okay.
So that are some topics we'll talk about. Every Friday we have meetings about the school. What are we going to do with the school? What are we going to do with the open day, for example? So that's something we really have to talk and work together with.
Yeah.
So that's I think more than you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So what I would think. So on the one hand, I think it could be a good thing, right? Because you have that, you really create that sense of belonging to an organization, for example, if you are meeting regularly. But on the other hand, I could also imagine that you sometimes encounter these meetings that do not really add anything, if you get what I mean. Is that true, or am I just assuming something?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes you're sitting there and thinking, wow, what a waste of time.
Yeah.
But sometimes also it can be quite interesting about the future of the school. Which direction are we going? What are we gonna do? So sometimes it's really a nice thing to have. but to be honest, most of the times I'm thinking, well, I've could have done a lot of other things to do, but that's always different.
Yeah, and that's also okay, I think.
But I'm kind of jealous about your flexibility. When I talk about you and I say, hey, can you meet me at Friday at 3, for example? Most of the times you say, yes, that's possible. I can do different things with my lesson, for example.
Yeah.
Your flexibility is way higher, and you often have more flexibility in your schedule. So that's something really different for my job. I'm really more about the schedule. We really have boundaries at the school, and we have the curriculum we have to deal with. Is that something you like to have those flexibility, or is something more, or do you also like to have more a schedule and more boundaries in your job?
Yeah, so basically how it works is I'm a junior lecturer, so I teach a lot. And when I'm teaching, I do not really have great flexibility, right? Because I have to be there and I have to give these tutorials or lectures or whatever. So then I'm quite time bound in that regard. On the other hand, so when I'm not teaching and I'm doing my administrative tasks or I have some meetings sometimes, then I'm quite able to throw things around, quite flexible. That's definitely something that I like about this job. So sometimes I don't have to do anything in the evenings. So what I then do is I'm going to work, for example. But that also means that the next day, so for example, when I would be expected to work, maybe based on a 9 to 5 mentality, is that I do something else in that time, partly, for example. So and I like that very much. But so maybe for the listeners, it would be interesting to know. So I think in a week, on average, I think on average 10, 12 hours really teaching on average every week. How is that for you? Is that more or less? Or
I'm teaching more hours. I'm teaching around 18 hours a week. So that's almost double than you're teaching. So that's something we really have to make the hours of teaching to pupils. We don't really have the flexibility in our schedule because of those hours. Hey, you have to be there. I can't say I'm doing this at a later moment of the day, or you have to be there. So that's we really have a schedule.
Yeah, and what sometimes happens for us, I'm curious to know if that's also true for you. So what we sometimes have is we have a course, and the first 3 weeks we teach, right? So I'm teaching. So for example, now I'm involved in the course Innovation Management in Multinationals, and the first 3 weeks, I think I taught 10 hours per week for that course. But then suddenly 1 week it's just nothing. So it's nothing, and then afterwards 2 weeks again teaching. So sometimes what I see in my schedule is that shifts. So what I can have is that I have one really full week, then again a full week, and then an emptier week. Is that also true for you, or would you say that's more stable in secondary teaching?
About the lessons through the week, it's more stable. We have one exam week that then the pupils are making exams of every subject in their what they have. But sometimes we have some peaks when we're talking about open days, and we have to be there in the night times. So that's more a hectic period, or when the parents are coming with a child to school, when we have a child teacher talking about the kid. Yeah. So that's something we have a really hectic weeks. But mostly it's more stable. We have those hours. Every week I have to teach around 18 hours.
Yeah.
But sometimes I have to be there at the night times to give a lesson for new children that are willing to join our school.
Yeah, because that's also something that's interesting. So I think in general, the situation in which universities are in is that so basically you do not really have to. So of course there are some things like student for a day and open days, that kind of stuff. But what we usually see is that the student numbers go up. And that's also something that I talk about with my colleagues, for example. So but basically we're trying to estimate a little bit, okay, how many students will be in our course. And basically that's always eventually more than what we would have expected. So we do not really have to pay attention to marketing in that regard to really get some new students to the university. So at least I'm not doing anything with it. So maybe other people are. Are you really involved in that? So do you really play an active role in making sure that new pupils, you already said something about it, but to make sure that they are coming to your school in Franeker?
Yes, it's really a big thing for our school. We have a declining population at the area of Franeker, so our competitor Simon Fokkema and the Anne-Marie van Schuurman school are really in a competition about every child in that area to choose for our school, of their school.
Yeah,
that's something we really have to be aware of, that our school is relevant, that we have nice things to do when they are coming at our school. Our marketing budget is relatively high because of that. It's really a big thing when you don't have enough children in the first year. Then it would mean that I would have less hours to teach, so that I would have less money at the end of the month because of that. So it's really a big thing that our marketing and that we have enough children at our first year, and I'm really involved in it. I have to make some lessons for the first years when they're coming at our school to have a look. So every teacher, every colleague of mine is really involved in it, because it's really a big thing that you have enough children at the end of the year.
Yeah. So I think for the university, I think it's so the search for new students is also a little bit broader if I think about it. So we have international students also. So we also have to to speak to them and to make sure that they are coming here. And what I'm sensing from your story is that basically the search that you have is really regional, quite. So that you have two schools in Franeker, and who's going to get the new pupils in Franeker, while we are maybe looking very broadly at, okay, where can we get the new students from? Do you think that's true?
Yes, I think that the competitors at the academic level in the Netherlands is less high. You also attract a lot of international students. We can't. Yeah. So that's something really a big difference for our two jobs.
Yeah, okay. So, all in all, I think we talked about, a lot of commonalities and differences between our jobs. So, for example, we talked about, how we prepare our lessons, the workload a little bit, the freedom that we have, the flexibility. So, in order to end this podcast, I'm having another question for you. And that's basically, let's say that I, as an academic teacher, would like to learn something from you as a secondary teacher. What would you recommend to me? What should I do differently? How can I improve in that regard?
Well, at my time at the university, I always find it quite weird that the professors, for example, didn't have really a lot of personal engagement with their students. I really have, I would almost say, a relation with the pupils in a good way. Yeah. So we really have, I know what they're doing in the weekends. I know if they have a side job. I know if they have a brother or sister at school. So we are really involved and more in a supportive atmosphere to achieve their goals. And I think that's something the university could learn more from the secondary schools, is to be more personal engaged with the students.
Yeah, so I would say usually it is something that we are trying a little bit, but so when you, for example, have a study such as business administration with 600 students, and you have, for example, 38 groups of 15 students, let's put it like that, then it's sometimes really hard to remember all the names, and I think that's also logical. So what we are trying to do, so I know that there are some plans for that, is also kind of making these smaller groups available. So really working in groups of 15 students, for example, and not only sitting in a lecture with 300, 400 people and just following the lecture. So, but I think you definitely have a point. So that's something that we could improve on. Do you have another point that we could still improve upon?
Well, I think some detective topics. We are using some different detective methods for the younger students. So I also think that would be really a great thing for the university, especially for the younger students. We have some suitable detective methods that are better for them of teaching new topics to them, to be more engaged with the lessons, to be more engaged with their education.
Okay, and what you actually teach them? So what's different in these methods then? What we could really improve?
So for example, we have more engagements in the lessons. So when you're giving a lecture in university about a topic, a lot of students won't be active. They will sit there, listen, and go back home. In the classrooms at the secondary school, we are way more engaged. They have to be more active. We are asking questions to the students. They have to be involved. Some small energizers in the lesson. So I think that's something you could learn from the secondary school. But I don't know, maybe it's not suitable, but that's up to you guys.
Yeah, so I think we are quite focused on evoking also discussions. So that's definitely something that we do also in smaller groups. So I would say that is quite central within a university. So really getting that interaction and talking about stuff. So I think that's the same. But yeah, when you talk, for example, about energizers in your lessons, then I do not really have an idea what to do, to be honest. But yeah, so maybe that's something that we could look at. So all in all, I think we can say, and I think we can conclude that, well, there are definitely more commonalities between the two teaching styles than you would initially expect. But there are also some important differences, and it's also important to keep them in mind. Falco, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. And I want to thank the listeners for listening, and I will catch you later. Bye!